Let me introduce today a very, very dear astrologer whom I met last year, exactly or approximately around this time. And he has more than 40 years of experience in astrology, has done more than readings of more than 10,000 people, that kind of experience. He has learned Western astrology for probably 35 plus years and been into Vedic astrology for nearly 20 years. Son of a diplomat, he traveled all over the world. His father later joined in the BJP government as a national security advisor. He works in Florida. For the last 18 years, he's been in Florida doing readings and readings. Lives a life on his own terms. Me and he have a common goal and common passion, which is to retire in the foothills of Himalayas in a small village. And I don't know whether that will come true. I really want it to come true, and without taking much time, let me introduce Shri Rakesh Mishra ji. Rakesh ji, please welcome to Saptarishis Astrology.
Namaste from Florida. So great to talk with you again, to see you, and looking forward to this.
Thank you, and sorry, it's probably past midnight over there for you.
12:40 at night, but luckily I'm a night person, so that's fine.
Rakesh ji, your journey in astrology has been pretty inspiring. And before we go to what you're going to teach at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam coming this June, it's a very unique topic you're going to teach on a transit method developed in Germany. Before we get that, I am so interested in at what age you started astrology.
So, as you know, my father was a IFS officer, diplomat. So I moved from country to country every few years, and I did my schooling in high school in Delhi, Xavier's Delhi, and graduated from there, and then moved to Europe. And my father was stationed in Europe at that time. So he sent me to school in London. I was 17 years old at that time. I must say that because nothing happens by mistake, and that there's always a divine power or a divine hand at work. And so I just want to mention this as well, because it's a fascinating story. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who started transcendental meditation, was stationed in Switzerland at that time. This was in the 70s, by the way. And he sent out an invitation to all the Indian diplomats in Europe to come and be initiated in TM for free. Both my parents, my mother and father, were initiated and had been doing TM for about 6-7 months. So one day, my dad says to me, get in the car, we're going to take a drive. And we're living in Geneva, Switzerland at that time. So my sister and I, we get in the car, we drive for about 2-3 hours, and we arrive at Maharishi European University. And Maharishi initiated me into TM himself. Truly remarkable experience. As they say, Shaktipat can be given in one of 3 ways, or 3 different ways, through touch, through the eyes, and through sound. And he took me into a room, looked me directly in the eyes like this, touched my forehead, and whispered the mantra into my ear. Now, remember, this is the 1970s, I had long hair, hippie, bell bottoms, the whole thing, And I'm like, this is weird, but, that's fine, So I started meditating regularly from that point on, 17 years old, And Maharishi himself was deeply into Jyotish. In fact, in the Maharishi University in Iowa, Mikhail was there last year, Mikhail. So he is a part of that. And so, again, there was a great deal of interest in Jyotish in Maharishi's group. Now, of course, I didn't know that at 17 years old. This is September that this happened. 2 months later, I'm in London, and there's a bomb scare. And so I have to walk back to the apartment that I live in a way I normally never would, in fact, ever. And I'm walking down this alleyway, this narrow cobblestoned alleyway, and looking down at the cobblestones, and I look up, and there's this faded doorway with a faded sign above it. Nobody else in this alleyway at all, completely deserted. And I look up, and it says the Zodiac. Now, this is November 1974, just to give you an idea, okay? And I didn't hesitate. There was not even a thought in my mind like, what the hell is this, I just walked in. And I bought my first astrology book. And of course, there were no computers at that time. So this book taught me how to make charts by hand.
Okay.
And from that day on, I started making a chart a day by hand. I was just obsessed, hooked from that moment. And so I would meet anybody, friends, family, whatever. I would just ask them for their birth information and make their chart by hand. Now, of course, this is Western astrology. And so this is how I began. And again, I don't believe that there are any mistakes. I believe that Maharishi planted this seed in me and accelerated my path, So I continued meditating twice a day, every day. And at the same time, I continued to study astrology on my own. Very basic stuff, So from that point on, I went on. I continued to study Western astrology for about 15 years.
Wow.
After that, I moved to Bombay. I went to college in Xavier's, Bombay, finished college there. 1979, that's because my dad was posted in Indonesia. There were no colleges I could go to there. 1979, he gets posted to New York. And so I finished college at Xavier's, and I moved to New York City in 1979, and then started studying my graduate work. My college was in psychology, and my graduate degree, my master's degree in New York, is in child psychology, developmental psychology. I used to work with children,
I'm quite sure psychology would be very helpful to you in your readings, especially in USA.
Absolutely. Very much so, very much so. You get all types, and so it's been very helpful to me in terms of what I do. Especially because my perspective, as you read on my website, is that we're on earth to grow and evolve, and to become more in touch with our divine spirit. And so the ego has to get out of the way for that. And for that to be done, the ego has to first heal. And so there are many psychological techniques and methods that we can see and utilize for this purpose. The chart shows what somebody's shadow is and what the shadow is that they're working on that is preventing them from reaching their divinity. So, of course, the psychological techniques are very helpful. So my dad at this time is the Indian ambassador to the UN. Okay, heavy duty. And Indian parents, So I'm getting a psychology degree. He expects me to become Dr. Mishra, and he's really quite happy with that and everything. So I did my internship in the South Bronx. It's an area of New York that was a war zone at that time. There was bad crime, gunfire every day. I was working with single parent teenage mothers, crack, that were on crack and cocaine and drugs. And I burned out. I did my internship there, and I realized that this is not how I wanted to spend my life. Now, astrology was my hobby, and I would just look at people's charts constantly. I continued for the last, since I was 17 years old, just looking at charts continuously, And people kept saying to me, wow, you're really good at this. You should charge money. Of course, I finished my master's degree, so my dad was like, well, okay, time to get your PhD, I'll pay for it. So I was like, well, Dad, I'm burned out. I've been in school 19 years straight, and I'm done. I'm toast. So he looks at me and says, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, people are asking me to do astrology readings, and so I think I'll do that until I figure out what I'm going to do next. So he looks at me like this, my dad. Those people that know Rakesh Mishra, National Security Advisor, he looks at me and he's like, you want to be a what? Just like that. So I was like, well, and of course I was deeply programmed. My thing was, I have to get a job one day, I have to get a real job. Astrology can't be a real job, So I was like, well, I'm just going to do readings until I figure out what I'm going to do next, He's like, fine, TK, whatever, So 1982, I started doing readings. By the way, other things started to happen. Again, I think this is Maharishi and divine hand. There was a spiritual bookstore, one of the largest in the world, right across from the college that I went to in New York City. It was called East West Books. So I used to spend all my time there, free time, looking at astrology.
I know. Is it still there?
Now it's gone, but it used to be there. Not anymore. You know, on 14th Street, 5th Avenue, that's where it used to be. A big place, you know. It was started by the Himalayan Institute, Swami Rama, you might remember, you know. Yeah, yeah. He and I used to smoke cigarettes together, you know. Great guy, you know. Truly a wonderful man. And so, you know, people would come to the astrology section. I'd say, well, don't buy this book, buy that one. So one day the manager comes up to me and says, do you want a job here? I'm like, sure. So I got a job working at East West Books. And of course, everyone that came in there was a ready-made client, you can imagine. You know, I'm very friendly and open, so I start talking to people and they'd be like, well, what do you do? I'm like, I'm an astrologer. So they're like, oh, do my chart, you know. So I started doing readings. Then there was a place called the New York Astrology Center. I went there, same thing. The manager comes to me one day and says, do you want a job here? I'm like, sure. And then a couple of years later, I'm at Weiser's bookstore, which you might remember. Weiser's bookstore was the largest metaphysical bookstore in the world, as well as a publishing house. Same thing. I used to tell people, I get this book, don't get this book. Manager says, do you want a job here? So while I was building up a clientele in New York, I worked 8 years in metaphysical bookstores. And again, everyone that came there was a ready-made client for me, you know? And then by 1990, I got to the point, which, you know, from 82 to 90, I did readings while I worked in the bookstore as well, you know. And by 1990, I had enough of a clientele where I didn't need to have a day job anymore. And so I quit working in bookstores. Now, while I was working at Weiser's bookstore, this quiet Indian guy used to walk in all the time. He worked in an office in an insurance company nearby, about 3 blocks away. So in his lunch break, he used to walk into Weiser's bookstore and, you know, we'd get talking. And his name also happened to be Rakesh.
Okay.
And this is how I met Rakesh Sharma, a dear friend who changed my life. So he and I started running into each other in New York City about 1989 or so, 88, 89, you know. He'd come into this bookstore and we would just talk astrology, and me, of course, talking Western astrology. So he said to me, you know, why don't you try Jyotish? Now, by this time, I had started to get disenchanted with Western astrology. There were parts of Western astrology, I'm like, there's got to be more, you know. And I realized that there were things in it that didn't work. Even the signs, for example. So I was like, for example, I never felt I was a Pisces. I'm not wishy-washy. I'm not emotional. I'm very mental. I mean, for fun, I read astrophysics and quantum physics. You know, I'm extremely mental, and I always never felt that. So of course, Rakesh says to me, "Well, you know, you're really an Aquarius." You know, and so I looked at him, and I started reading Jyotish books in 1990. And Rakesh would then tell me, well, read this one, don't read this one, and so on and so on. So what I had done for others for years, he did for me.
Rakesh has been instrumental in driving the movement of Jyotish in USA. I mean, he has played a great role, actually.
Absolutely. You know, for our audience that doesn't know Rakesh Sharma, he's on the board of Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. Yeah, so he took me to Arsha Vidya Gurukulam in 1990, where I met Karveji.
Yogi Karve.
Now, Yogi Karveji, yes. You know, and so, of course, being born in India in a small town in Madhya Pradesh, in Sagar, I had an approximate time of birth, you know, and my time of birth fell between 2 lagnas. And so Karveji looks at me in 1990, his eyes get really big. And he's like, ye to sandhi hai bhai. You know, and of course, all this time I thought I had a Gemini ascendant, and he's like, no, Taurus ascendant, you know. So, I mean, it was life-changing. Let me just say, meeting Rakesh Sharma, going to Arsha Vidya first time, 1990, meeting Yogi Karveji, and finding my correct lagna, all of these things happened at that time. So right at that moment, I switched from So then I used the tropical zodiac and the sidereal zodiac with every single client for 3 years. That's about 1,000 people. You know, I have Mercury in Capricorn connected to Shani. Shani is in Mercury's nakshatra. So I have a Mercury Shani thing going on. So I'm very perfectionistic. You know, I have to be right. I have to make sure. So I used tropical sidereal with every client for 3 years. And by the end of this, I had no doubt that the sidereal zodiac worked much better, completely so, you know, and especially by looking at the house rulerships. I mean, really, all you need to do is understand the house rulerships, their combinations, and you can see minute details of a person's life. And so, of course, I'm actually very happy I learned Western astrology first, because there are great things to Western astrology.
Can you tell us something that you have about Western astrology that you use in your readings?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, as you were saying in your own introduction, you know, I'm a professional astrologer. I started doing readings in 1982. I stayed in New York City from 1979 until the year 2000 and did readings there in New York for 18 years, you know, and then have been in Florida for 18 years. And so I've spoken to about 10,000 people in every part of the world. You know, I have clients all over Asia, all over Europe, hundreds in the US, South America. And so I've developed a system, you know, because I'm doing 2 readings a day. And so I basically use what works, like at least 90% of the time. If it doesn't work consistently, I don't want to know. You know, I don't have the time or the patience, you know, to be honest. And so I've taken things from Jyotish as well as from Western astrology and combined them into something quite unique, in fact, in terms of what I do. You know, I don't know of anyone else that does. I'll give you an example. In Western astrology, which is, you know, 2,000 years old, going back to the Greeks, I'm using a transit system that was developed by the Germans in the early 1900s. It's called cosmobiology. And it's a way of looking at transits that is incredibly rapid, quick understanding of which transit is the most important at any given time. Now, in Jyotish, you know, they have the luxury of the dashas. The dashas are remarkable, of course, you know, and so they have the luxury of using the dashas, and became, in my opinion, a little too dependent on it, and didn't focus as much attention to gochar, you know, transits. Although, of course, there's deep understanding of it in Jyotish, I understand, but in day-to-day usage, it's not used as much, is my experience, you know. Whereas in Western astrology, of course, they didn't have the luxury of the dashas. And they really perfected transit analysis in a way that I feel goes well beyond what is understood in Jyotish, you know.
Are you saying, sorry to interrupt you here, are you saying that you found cosmobiology transits far better than the traditional Western astrology transits?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
And that's what you're going to teach this time.
And that's what I'm going to teach this time. Exactly. Yeah. And I'm going to make it simple, but this is what I'm going to get deeply into. So the cosmobiological system, it uses the Tajik aspects.
Okay.
And it's especially looking at squares and semi-squares.
Okay.
Now, you know, as I spoke with you last year at Arsha Vidya, you know, I'm especially looking at stations when planets are stationary. This is something that is essential to do, you know. And in fact, I use the outer planets as well, of course, you know, but honestly, to my esteemed audience, I would say, if you look at only just the stations of Saturn, of Shani, using this cosmobiological system, it'll blow you away in terms of its accuracy. And using that with the dashas, then, will allow you to really fine-tune prediction in quite a remarkable way, you know? So again, as you know, squares, which are 90-degree angles, right angles, divide the circle into 4. You also have semi-squares. Semi-squares are 45-degree angles. And so in cosmobiology, they use something called a 45-degree dial. I can show you a chart that shows what it is at the bottom in a moment, you know. But basically, on this dial, it's a basically a long dial. Basically, you can see 45-degree aspects in an instant like this. And then when you put Shani's stations on it, you'll see every planet that is being activated by conjunction, by half square, semi-square, by 90 degrees, which is a full square, then 135 degrees, which is 90 plus 45, that's called sesqui-square, and then, of course, an opposition, which is 180 degrees, and then, of course, you have another 135 degrees, which is sesqui-square. So if you look at a full circle, you're going 45, 90, 135, opposition, 135, 45, and then back to a conjunction, you know? So there are these 8 different points. So this dial will show you in an instant whether a planet is being activated by conjunction, opposition, semi-square, square, or sesqui-square. And my suggestion is to look for within 3 degrees, 2 to 3 degrees before, 2 to 3 degrees after a station. And especially, and you can do this only with Shani's stations, by the way, you know? So just because I know that these are learned people in the audience, and so I'll share with you very quickly how this works. If you hold for 1 second, I'll get a chart and I'll show you. Okay. So you can see over here, down at the bottom, there's a bar.
Yeah.
Okay, and this bar, you'll see, is 0 to 45 degrees. Starting here, 0, and running to 45.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the natal planets are here. And I'm sorry I use the Western symbols, but basically, now, as you can tell, okay, so here's the full chart, basically. So this person has the sun at 9 degrees of Taurus.
Okay.
Or let's say, okay, let's use the moon over here, the moon down here at 29 degrees of Libra.
Okay.
Okay? And then over here, we see Venus at 15 degrees of Gemini. See that?
Yeah.
Now, down here at the bar, can you see this at the bar? You'll see the moon and Venus right next to each other.
Okay.
That's because they are 135 degrees away from each other in the natal chart, in the birth chart.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so basically, it's very easy to see. From Venus at 10 degrees of Gemini to 10 degrees of Libra is obviously 120 degrees, right? Air sign to air sign. And you add 15 more to that, and you'll get 135, which will then bring it to 29 degrees over here. Okay, so basically all this means is that this lady has Moon Venus natally at 135 degrees away from each other. And Shani right now is stationary at this point. As you know, Shani is stationary at 15 degrees of Gemini, Sagittarius, as we speak. Okay, so right now Shani by station is activating her Moon, her Venus, and her Jupiter as well.
Okay.
So you can see that Jupiter is over here. So Jupiter and the Moon are 90 degrees away from each other. You can see this is a square.
Correct.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah.
And Venus over here is semi-square, half square, 45 degrees away from Jupiter, and 135 degrees away from the Moon.
Correct.
And that's why on this bar over here, you can see Moon, Venus, Jupiter right next to each other.
Right.
Now you can even bring this Mars into the picture over here. Mars and Jupiter are opposite each other. See that?
Yeah.
And the Moon here is 90 degrees to both ends.
Correct.
And then Venus is 135 from here to here, 135 from here to here, and 45 to there. Now, basically what this bar is showing me in an instant is that these 4 planets are in a very tight configuration with each other.
Okay.
Okay. And so basically what's going on with her now at this time is a major career change. She's Venus rules her 10th house.
Okay.
Mars rules her 4th house. So she's been living in Florida now. You can see Scorpios down here. And so Mars rules the 4th house. Venus rules the 10th house. And so she's gotten tired of living in Florida. And what she's been doing is teaching yoga. And she also does acupuncture and things like that. So she's decided that she's leaving Florida and moving to California as we speak, and starting a new life and a new career elsewhere.
Wow.
And this is to do with an activation of 4th house, 9th house. I'm sorry, I'm using the Western wheel, guys. Bear with me, you know. But can I just share why I like to use the Western wheel for a second? Okay, because I'm well versed in using the square format as well. But again, you know, what happens in astrology is that it becomes too abstract. We disconnect from the sky. And we really need to understand the sky. Like when we say, you know, oh, these planets are 10 degrees apart, do people understand that 10 degrees is actually this much distance in the sky? You know, your thumb from here to here is 1 degree, as an example, you know? So I'm fascinated with the sky. And to me, the circle is visually accurate. It's a 3-dimensional picture of the sky at the time and at the place this person was born. And so the horizontal line here is the horizon. Everything here was above, everything here was below. The lagna is over here. And this is obviously the rising position, which is the east. So everything rises here, is here at noon, here at sunset, and down here at midnight. So I'm very used to looking at it visually. I look at this chart and I see instantly the way the sky looked at the moment that this person was born, you know? And this is one of the things that I've gotten from Western astrology that I prefer to use, you know? So for me, it's easy to see the bottom of the chart, which is the home area, is being activated with a long distance move, the 4-9 connection, you know? And she's starting she's going to be working for a friend that has a center in California. So in any case, I won't get too deep into it, but the point that I'm making is that as Shani went stationary on this position and activated all 4 of these planets, so it was from here, it was activating Mars as a semi-square. It's in the area of others, of relationships. People reached out to her from California and said, why don't you come to California? We'll give you a job. Okay. Now, Shani had just finished going through her 4th house. And she had her Saturn return in the 4th house, you know? So to me, Shani is the great master, of course, you know? And it always ends in old structure and plants seeds for new ones. So the last 3 years of her life, Saturn going through her 4th house had to do with her ending and completion of where she had been. And it was time to move on. And so again, through others, she's being led to a long distance move and starting a new work and business and career with friends. And that again is Venus in the 11th house.
Yeah.
Okay. And she's moving on Tuesday.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, you know, and so this is a client I did a reading for 12, 13 years ago, and she contacted me and she's like, please, I need a reading, you know? So again, this is basically, and this is just a vivid example of 4 planets being activated by Shani's station right now as we speak.
Wow.
Now, at the conference, I'll be discussing Obama, Trump, Emmanuel Macron, the French president as well, famous people, you know, Angelina Jolie, and things like that, and showing how these station points will work. Now, by the way, you know, not to leave the audience hanging, how you can use the 45-degree dial is extremely simple, okay? When a planet is at 0 degrees of cardinal signs, you know, what they call movable signs, then obviously it's going to be 45 degrees away from 15 degrees of fixed signs.
Correct.
You understand? It's that simple. And that's what this shows over here. So when a planet is at 0 degrees of a fixed sign, it's going to be 45 degrees will take it to 15 degrees of a mutable or changeable sign. And you can see that here. Jupiter is at 0 degrees of Leo, and it's 45 degrees away from Venus, which is at 15 degrees of Gemini.
Yeah, bang on.
Okay? And so basically the amazing thing about this system, and basically why do they use the 8th harmonic, 45 degrees or 9? The way I'm going to teach it at Arsha Vidya is just first looking at squares. I don't want to blow their minds too much, because many of them are not professionals and they're students, so I don't want to blow their minds too much. I'm just going to help them understand squares first. Like, for example, Mars here at 1 degree, Jupiter here at 0 degrees, Moon here at 29 degrees, So if a planet is stationary over here, it's going to activate all 3. So I'm just going to show them squares first. But afterwards, if people are getting it, then I'm going to bring in the 45 degree aspect of it, because it's much more accurate to take it to that level. Now, why? If you understand aspects are primarily based on the number 2 or the number 3. Apart from 5 and 7, 5th harmonic and 7th harmonic, Saptamsha. But the 3 series, like 3, 6, 9, is to do with harmony. It's when energies are in harmony with each other. Whereas the 2 series, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, are based on tension. And if you want to understand something deep about physical manifestation, nothing manifests without tension. When everything is harmonious and balanced, then there's not enough tension to have creation in a physical level. And they know this in astrophysics as well. For example, matter and antimatter. If matter and antimatter were completely balanced, there would be no creation. There has to be a little bit more matter than antimatter for there to be physical creation, actually, when you really get down to it, So in any case, when you have an opposition, when you have a square, which is based on the number 2 or the number 4, or a semi-square or sesqui-square, which is based on the number 8, you have tension. And so these are trigger points, is the basic understanding from Tajik aspects, and especially if you go deeply into sacred geometry that the Greeks got deeply into, in fact, So in the 80s, I read a really fascinating book called Supernature, and it talked about this. You can test this out for yourself, by the way. So if you build a perfect pyramid out of cardboard, okay, like an exact equilateral pyramid, and you put a piece of meat in it, it won't decay for days. This is why the pyramids and all our ancient cultures lived in conical or pyramidical structures. Biological matter doesn't decay or break down as quickly, because again, it's based on harmony, not tension. Whereas right angles bring in tension. Squares. If you take that same piece of meat and put it in a shoebox, it'll start decaying instantly. And you can test this out for yourself. It's been done by scientists. You can take a used blade, shaving blade, and put it in a perfect pyramid, and it'll be sharp after a couple of days.
Oh.
And this has all been tested. You can do this for yourself, by the way. This is sacred geometry, is what this is, when you really get down to it, So aspects are how we divide the circle. Do we divide it based on the number 2, opposition, number 4, or 3, which is a trine, or a sextile, and so on and so on. So this shows how energy is working together. So to take it to a deeper level, in Western astrology, they look at squares as bad. It doesn't work that way. It's a trigger, to be honest. Okay, so that's very simplistic, and Western astrologers are always like, oh, a square is bad. Saturn is squaring my sun, I'm screwed, It doesn't work that way. It's a trigger, basically. And you need tension. You need a certain amount of conflict for there to be external manifestation. And the ancients really understood this, and this is what the Germans went further with. They tried all kinds of aspects. And they found that those aspects that responded to transits most sensitively and most intimately were based on the number 8, which is semi-squares. But you can also do it with squares. They first started with squares and they realized that semi-squares work as well, you know? And this is essentially what I'm going to be teaching, is how to do this. And I do this with the outer planets as well. So for example, here, I've put the stations of Shani for 2018, 2019. I also have it for Pluto here and Uranus and Neptune over here as well. So I use this with the outer planets. Uranus and Neptune, not as important, but Pluto, tremendously important, you know? So from that perspective, you know, but honestly, try it for yourself. I'll teach this and I'll show you how to, you can create this bar yourself, this 45-degree bar. You just need to have a bar like this and divide it into 45 segments, you know, just like this. And you can take a photograph of it, but you can then, you know, photocopy this for yourself or do this with every client and then put in the natal planets. And then, now I take it a step further. Another Western astrology technique I use is called secondary progressions. So you might have heard of it, okay? So the secondary progressions is a day for a year. It works remarkably well, you know? So if I'm 60 years old, you count 60 days ahead from my birth date, and then the planets, those on that day, 60 days ahead, will represent my 60th year, you know? And so basically then, and on this printout, you have the natal planets, and then in blue, I add in the progressed planets.
Okay.
And then down here in black, I have the Saturn stations, Saturn stationary. And then in red, I have the outer planet stations. So I'm very much into color, you know, and I color code it so I can see it instantly, like in an instant. So over here in blue at the top are the progressed planets.
Okay.
So, for example, here you can see in her chart, the sun is her Lagna Lord. Her Lagna is Leo. Sun is Lagna Lord. Her progressed sun is now reaching the same position as Uranus in her chart in the 12th house. And the 12th house, again, is long distance. It's an ending of an old life, beginning of a new life, a long distance move. The sun is the Lagna Lord, you know? It's many things along those lines that you can see using secondary progressions. So again,
major changes.
Yeah. And by the way, just so you understand, I'm not neglecting Jyotish. So over here, of course, you can see I have the Navamsha.
Okay.
Over here, I have the nakshatras and their rulers. And then I have the dashas here.
Okay.
So to 2 levels and then to 3 levels as well. And then I also use Yogini Dasha, which I also have down here.
Okay.
So the two apps that I use, the software that I use, allows me to make my own pages.
Okay.
So I run the same sheet through the printer twice. One using a Western astrology app called Solar Fire, and the other using Parashara's Light.
Okay.
And on both these programs, these apps, I've created separate pages. So you can see this dark black over here is Parashara's Light. Same thing with the nakshatras and their rulers here. And over here, by the way, I have declinations. By the way, the declinations are extremely important. Which
you know, I have seen, and I have mentioned this in my previous videos also, that Parashar Rishi mentioned declinations as Kranti. Unfortunately, Vedic astrologers do not use Kranti or declination, whereas Western astrologers use declination like anything. You know,
even Western, truthfully, they don't use it as much because it's not as easy to see. I learned it, but the common day-to-day Western astrologer does not use declinations that much. But again, you know, it's a bias because then we're looking at the zodiac and positions on the zodiac, but not on the ecliptic, up, down, you know, and both are equally important. So again, I believe this is true with Trump as well as Emmanuel Macron, where their first house and 10th lords are conjunct by declination, which is again very important. Look at Trump's chart. His sun, which is his Lagna lord, and Venus, which is his 10th lord, are conjunct by declination. Okay, because otherwise, how else, because you've got to have some kind of Lagna connection with the 10th, for the amount of power that has come to him, and I couldn't find it anywhere else that I looked at. In the declination, it was bang on, right there, That's just one example. You'll see it again and again and again, So some Western astrologers even look at transits by declination. It's too tiring for me. I don't do that, truthfully, but I'm sure it'd be valid. So I look at the declinations essentially for my own analysis of the birth chart. So as you see on my website, which, by the way, if anyone wants to see, it's my name, rakeshmishra.com. But I tell every client that there's two parts to your chart. So first, there's your birth chart, of course, which I call the game plan of your soul. So my belief is that we plan that Earth is a school. And just like when we went to school, like to college, we planned our year in advance, what our classes and courses were going to be. Similarly, on a soul level, we plan our life before we come to Earth in great detail. Imagine that your soul is on the top of a mountain and it can see way back into your previous lives. It can look ahead into your future lives. It knows exactly what you need to experience in this life for your growth and evolution. We as the ego are down at the bottom of the valley. We can only see a little further ahead, So to me, the birth chart is the soul's game plan. And again, the reason I mention this, and this is one of the things that bothers me about Jyotish, as it's practiced in India now, not originally, is that everything is malefic, benefic. Everything is good or bad. There is no good or bad. Honestly, truthfully, if you truly believe in God, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, then everything is happening exactly as it should, as a lesson, as a growth, And this is my approach. And my clients love this about me. And I have famous movie stars, politicians as clients of mine, things like that. But even with them, I approach it this way. Like when they say, oh, is this bad? I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't see it that way. And so the birth chart to me is the game plan of the soul, what this person came to do in this life for the next step in their evolution. And then, of course, the second part of your chart is the life clock, which is the unfolding of this game plan in time. And this is the other reason I like the wheel, is because it looks like a clock. And your chart is in terms of the hands of the clock, basically. So in any case, the declination is very important for understanding internet connection unstable. Is it back?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it back? Okay.
Declination, you were telling, it's important to...
So I was just, and by the way, they say in the books about declinations that you should use only 1 degree. I find that it works to 2 degrees. And this is one of the things that I like about Jyotish, is that they use much wider orbs, and you should actually, So I find 2 degrees work for parallels. In Western astrology, we call it parallel, when they're the same declination. When they're opposite, it's called contra-parallel. So I use 1 degree for that.
Okay.
Now, this lady, as an example, she has Mars and Saturn in Parivartana. So Mars in Saturn sign in the 7th house, Saturn in Mars' sign in Scorpio. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and Saturn is 7th lord, and Mars is 9th lord, as well as 4th lord. Now, in the declination, you'll see also that Mars and Saturn are about 1.5 degrees away from each other. And that is compounding it. By the way, every relationship she's had has been a long distance relationship.
Oh.
Ninth Lord, every single one. But you could see that just with the Parivartana, to be honest, but it also shows up with the declination as well. And so various aspects of this. With the declinations, you'll sometimes see things that you won't see in other places in the chart. Other times you'll get confirmation. Now, I'm sure, Sunilji, you feel the same way. If I see something in one place in someone's chart, it's important. If I see it in 2 places, it's huge. If I see it in 3 places, it's massive. Okay, so I use the shotgun approach. The more pellets that hit the target, the more it's going to go down, basically, is my approach. And again, this is why I use some Western techniques, some Vedic techniques, and combine them. And it leads to great accuracy. So again, this is why, yeah, go ahead.
I'm dying to ask you a question. I'm dying to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Perfect candidate who can really reply to this question. You've been doing Western astrology, you've been doing Vedic astrology. Both of them have different ayanamsas.
Yes.
You see a chart for each client of yours. You're seeing it via Western ayanamsa and via...
No. I only use sidereal. I'm sorry, I should have said this right in the beginning. I'm a sidereal astrologer. So I don't use the tropical zodiac at all. It doesn't work.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I use Western techniques, but I'm only using the sidereal zodiac. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. And I say this on my website in that the technical term for what I do is sidereal astrology, using Vedic and Western techniques.
Okay.
So, like, for example, I do astrocartography, but no, truthfully, I used every tropical and sidereal with every client for 3 years. 1,000 people. Tropical zodiac does not work. There's some neo-Vedic astrologers out there like Ernst Wilhelm and things that use both. The tropical zodiac doesn't work. I'm sorry, So I only use the sidereal zodiac. But since you brought up the ayanamsa, this is a big thing for me. And so I just want to say that I've done a lot of research on this. A huge amount of research in the last year. And you can imagine with double Mercury Shani in my chart, I'm really into research, So I have to say that the ayanamsa cannot be fixed on a specific star. Because over millennia, the stars will move. The fixed stars are not fixed. They have their own proper motion. And I'm deeply into this. I've studied this quite a bit, actually, because I'm into astrophysics as well, The ayanamsa has to be fixed on the galactic center. Mm-hmm. There's no other way, truthfully, David Frawley-Ji, who will be at the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, says exactly the same thing. And Sri Yukteswar also went into this in a certain way. He talked about the Vishnu Nabhi, which is the navel of Vishnu, the center. And from that center, the churning came creation. At the center of our galaxy is a supermassive black hole, a churning of stars there. It literally is like this, the way they described in ancient mythology. And so everything in our galaxy rotates around the galactic center. And this is what the ancients were going for, actually, in terms of using as a specific ayanamsa. So I did a lot of research on this, and if people want to go into this further, I recommend going to astro.com, Astrodienst, and the people who did the Swiss ephemeris. They have an ayanamsa section that is remarkable. It goes through every ayanamsa and gives the basis for it, and then an analysis of it. And again, Ernst Wilhelm came up with this several years ago. And is using this, but David Frawley-Ji as well. And there are more and more Western sidereal astrologers that are now using the galactic center. So the galactic center can only be one of 2 things. And this is just for you guys to explore. One is the actual center of the galaxy, which I can show some diagrams later when I see you, Sunilji, but even our solar system, as it goes around, spins around the galaxy, it's got a wave-like motion. you know, and it takes a few million years to go this way and a few million years to go this way, meaning that our solar system's position, the sun's position to the galactic center, is also shifting minutely. The only thing that doesn't change is the galactic plane. It's called the galactic equator, the center of the galaxy, and our ecliptic. And I wish I could show you, I have the diagrams, you know, from astronomy websites that is saved. But basically, our solar system spins like this at an angle of 66 degrees to the center of the galactic equator. So imagine this is the galactic equator, and our solar system is like this. And the ecliptic, as you know, is the path that all the planets follow. So where the ecliptic cuts the galactic equator is the actual ayanamsa point.
Okay.
So now, the smarter people, Ernst Wilhelm, David's Astrology as well, you know, they have put the galactic center where the galactic equator crosses and our ecliptic cross each other at the middle of Mula.
Okay.
So Mula, when you really get down to it, the root, it really does get into the spin. You know, it really gets into Mula being, you know, this chaotic spin at the center of everything. And in fact, in some ancient texts, I believe they say the nakshatras actually began with Mula. You know, this is in some texts they talk about this, you know. So basically, the galactic plane crossing the ecliptic right in the middle of Mula is the actual ayanamsa. Now, the offset is only 28 minutes from Lahiri.
Okay.
And Lahiri ji himself said, well after this was chosen, he said, my ayanamsa is off by 27 minutes. He said this in interviews himself. If you go to, again, astro.com, they have the quote by him that's there. You know, but again, Ernst Wilhelm brings this up as well. So there's different places that you can put the galactic center. You can put it at 0 degrees of Sagittarius, which is the beginning of Mula. Or you can put it in the middle of Mula. But those are the only two possible positions. And obviously, the difference between them would be about 6 degrees and 40 minutes. So essentially, and try it for yourself. Like, for example, with famous people's charts that have exact times. Do it with Donald Trump, do it with Obama, especially do it with Emmanuel Macron, the youngest person to become a French president a year ago. Yeah. If you look at his chart, in Lahiri, he would still be running Ketu, which is in Shani sign, the terrible thing. He could, and we have an exact time of birth for him. Macron could not have become president running Ketu. But using 28 minutes later, an offset of 28 minutes means he started Venus, and Venus is his 10th lord.
Oh.
And I've done this with hundreds of charts. I look, if you go to Wikipedia and look at Angelina Jolie's chart, you know, you have an exact time of birth for her, and it lists every single time she adopted a child from Cambodia or Vietnam or Africa. She had her own twins, when she had her mastectomy. They have exact dates for these. And look at them under the dashas. And Parashara's life is very simple to go from Lahiri to add a 28-minute offset. It's less than half a degree. But that is what I find works incredibly well.
Okay.
It's just research for you guys, you know.
I want to call you back just for a lecture on ayanamsa.
I'd be more than happy, because I'll get diagrams and things together on this, you know.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to do a special lecture on this with Saptarishis Astrology YouTube channel. The way you explained the French president, you know,
yes,
that with this ayanamsa, he's supposed to be running this. But if you change the ayanamsa, he's running his 10th Lord's Dasha. And exactly. If you can just show us 5-6 charts this way, you know.
I've looked at dozens, Sunilji, and because again, you know, Mercury and Shani sign, you know, and Shani in Mercury's nakshatra. By the way, I go back and forth between signs and nakshatras, so to me, that's a parivartana as well, you know. So I'm extremely perfectionistic, and so I'll be more than happy to do this.
That'll be
And again, yeah, because again, there are a lot of different ways it could go. You could choose to put the galactic center at 0 degrees of Sagittarius. But that would be a huge difference of 6 degrees. Everything would change. Usha Shashi, ayanamsa, is based on the galactic center, which is off by 3 degrees and 48 minutes from Lahiri. Even that's too much, because I've done this with dozens of famous people's charts with exact birth times. So this is the one thing I want to give credit to Ernst Wilhelm. I mean, truly, because he brought this up in the early 2000s, where he said the galactic center crossing the ecliptic or the actual galactic center itself, only one of these two can be the correct ayanamsa. And it can either be at 0 degrees of Sagittarius or middle of Mula. Now, I've checked all 4 of them using famous people's charts, and the only one that works consistently is galactic plane crossing ecliptic at middle of Mula, which just happens to be only 28 minutes difference from Lahiri.
Okay.
That's less than half a degree. Okay. Now, my moon was in Venus's nakshatra, Purvashada. So, 1 minute equals 5 days, in Vimshotri for me. So that 28 minutes changes my dashas by about 9 months earlier. So, like in my case, my mom passed a year ago, and she couldn't have passed in Rahu Mars, which is what I was running.
Okay.
She passed 2 months after I went into Guru Dasha using this.
Okay.
My moon is in Sagittarius in the 8th house. So, of course, Guru Dasha would have activated moon in the 8th house, mom passing, But again, this is just in my chart, I was born in a small town in India. I don't have an exact time of birth, even though Karveji rectified it for me. And I've rectified it myself. But I have personal experience with this as well, but just using famous people.
Can I?
So much for ayanamsa. We will do more on ayanamsa again,
Quickly, can I share you Ernst Williams software on screen?
Yeah.
Can I share
Kala.
Ernst Williams Kala's this thing? Do you see the ayanamsa tab here?
Yeah, I do. So that would be either a galactic plane at the top.
That's the one to use.
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Yeah. But he's off by about half a minute. If you read, if you go to astro.com and read their ayanamsa section, then the galactic plane crossing the ecliptic, according to the Swiss ephemeris, is 27 minutes and 14. Yeah. So is 27 minutes and 14 seconds. Now, using famous people's charts, I've come to realize it's 28 minutes. Okay, so I'm using 28 minutes, but the official, what's out there officially is 20, and Lahiri ji himself said that he felt it was 27 minutes off.
Okay.
So, and what the Swiss ephemeris comes up with is 27 minutes and 14 seconds. And Lahiri ji said 27 minutes difference, He admitted this in an interview later. But for myself, I'm using 28. I just find it works better.
Okay.
Just so you know. But please try this out, because honestly, Jyotish is so dependent on dashas, truthfully, and dashas can be off by several months. Vimshotri will be off by several months. And of course, we try and make it work. As astrologers, we can make anything work. But if you try this with a 27 to 28 minute offset, you will find that it works every single time dead on. You don't have to make it fit. I mean, when somebody becomes president, they've got to be running 10th Lord. They have to, one way or the other, it's got to be there, For us to use something like this, it has to work at least 90% of the time, 80% of the time, please, so that's where I'm perfectionistic about it. But again, even theoretically, because anyone that is interested in astronomy, astrophysics, you cannot have the ayanamsa located on a fixed star. Because if you look at Vedic cosmology, where they're working with yugas that are millions and millions of years, okay, when you're working with time spans like that, these stars are going to move quite a bit in those millions of years, and the sages, the rishis, were too intelligent to not know that. So they, when they talk about Lahiri and fixing it on Spica, it's because it's a star that was visible to us, and right behind it was the galactic center within half a degree. That's all that they were doing when they said, well, use this star, because it was visible to us. Rather than saying to someone, well, gee, behind that is a supermassive black hole. That's the center of our galaxy, they were just like, we'll use this star because it's close enough for now. And that's really, where a lot of that came from. So it's fascinating to go into this, actually, to go into it further.
It's been a very fascinating conversation with you on ayanamsa. I'm really intrigued, and I personally would like to take it further with you when I meet you in June.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Rakesh ji, for coming on Saptarishis Astrology channel. And
no, it's my pleasure. Wonderful.
We want you to keep on coming on our channel, and especially share your techniques on ayanamsa, declination, just with 4-5 example horoscopes.
Absolutely. Well, I would love to share synastry as well, relationship analysis.
Yeah, that's what you taught last time last year at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. That is a beautiful technique, actually. You should.
And it works 90+% of the time.
Yeah.
And I want to make an app with this and market it and sell it to Facebook for 30 million. So that's the idea. No, but it's a unique system combining Western and Vedic that works amazingly well compatibility-wise. So someday I'd love to share that as well. But it's been a pleasure talking with you. Great.
Pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much.
See you in about a month.
Yeah, in a month we see. Less than a month, actually. 6th I'm there. Today is.
Yes.
Yeah, it's less than a month. I see you, and it's a pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much for staying up so late in the night doing this session with us. I am grateful. For you, really grateful.